Welcome back to Hi-Fi Lo-Fi. What have I got for you this time? Well, here it is, still in its bubble wrap. I'm going to unwrap it in a moment and I shall give you a hint. It is 20.5 centimeters wide, and if you've been following me on this channel you'll have an idea at least what series it belongs to, and you may be able to see through the bubble wrap what it is. Let's get it unwrapped and have a look. Here it is. It is the MD-105TX. That's the Onkyo Intec 205 series MD-105TX. When I said 20.5 centimeters, I was referring to the Onkyo Intec 205 series, which the number 205 refers to 205 millimeters across the front width. Now, if you've watched my last video and indeed some other videos, I have a thing for the Intec series, and you'll see in the last video I looked at the Intec 275 series, and the 275 refers to the width across the front of each component, that is 275 millimeters. So what I'm doing is I'm putting together an Intec 205, an additional Intec 205 system, because as you've already seen elsewhere on the channel, I have already got an Intec 205 series system, but it's the newer, slightly newer generation. So like with the last video with the Intec 275, you saw that there are two generations of that. Now there are two generations of the main design of that, but actually over the years some models were upgraded and new models came out, new components came and went indeed. So for comparison today, I've actually got the later version of the Intec 205 HiMD-105FX. Now, you'd be forgiven for thinking that in the evolution of the product range that a TX would surely come after an FX, but that was something that I imagined would happen. But no, the FX is actually a later model than the TX. So this is a HiMD, and I'm very glad I got this, because there are very few HiMD decks still around. In fact, as far as I know, Onkyo only Onkyo made HiMD decks. All the other HiMD devices were portable devices such as Walkmans. So, as far as I'm aware, only Onkyo produced HiMD decks, and I have both of those models. One for the 275 Intec 275 series range, and this one for the Intec 205 series range. So, like with the previous video in the 275 series, you can see there is a very slight, well, it's less obvious here, the difference in colour. So with the 275 range you could see quite a big difference in colour, but with the 205, the newer generation is slightly more silver, and the older generation is slightly bronze, slightly gold, slightly bronze. And I'm going to put them down. They're not heavy. I mean, as it happens, this one is slightly heavier than this one. And I'm going to put them down, do some close-ups, turn the camera around. Right, here we are. We've got them lined up next to each other on the table in the living room. And I'm holding an old iPad to record this. No specialist equipment, so bear that in mind, please. As you can see, the older generation on the left is a slight bronze colour, and the newer generation on the right is slightly more silvery grey. Looking at the Onkyo logo there, it's a slightly yellowy colour, and on the later generation slightly grey colour. Looking at the top, by the way, you can see that the newer generation has got more vent holes in the top. That's an interesting, it's got an extra row of vent holes. Does that mean it gets hotter? I don't know. One thing I did definitely notice is that the newer generation is slightly heavier. So I suspect that the reason it's heavier is more to do with power supply and heat sinking than anything else. Interestingly, that this one clearly says on it 24-bit processing. Now, a lot of MD decks from this era clearly say 24-bit processing, and that compares with others from the same era and slightly earlier that say 20-bit processing. We'll assume that 24-bit processing is better, but not always, because I've heard 20-bit processing decks such as the top of the range Sony decks, which are absolutely superb. I would be interested to know, actually, is there a discernible difference in recording quality? I suspect that it's not all down to how many bits in the processing. I suspect it's down to a lot of other things as well. So this doesn't have any such thing on the front, doesn't say how many bits in the processing, but what it does have, it's got something called vector linear shaping circuitry, which this doesn't seem to have. And they both say DLA, digital record level adjustment. They both say that, albeit in different places. It's up there on that one. You can see that the buttons are different. I mean, the standby, that is the on-off switch. The standby switch is rectangular on this one and round on this one. There are some other obvious differences in the shape and size of some of the switches and the buttons and things. So I'll just let you, if I hold it there for a moment, pause your video now if you want to get a better look at that. And then if I go across to the other one, pause your video now if you want to get a better look at that. There we are. They are obviously from different eras, and this one is the HiMD. This is not a HiMD. There is a non-HiMD version in the later generation which looks identical, and the only thing that I could see, I don't have one, but I have seen it online. I've seen some of them online for sale. The only thing I can tell that is different at all is simply this one says on it HiMD audio in blue for some reason. Let's turn them around and let's see what they look like from behind. Okay, we've got the rear view. We've got them in the same order. The left is the older, the right is the newer. Not really any difference. Both of them analog in and analog out RCA. There we are, analog in, analog out RCA. They both have the remote control sockets for these are for if you link them together with other Intec 205 series or Onkyo devices. I'm not sure whether it's only Intec 205, whether it works on any Onkyo device, not sure, haven't tried that. And digital optical inputs, got two of those. So very much the same. I would say the same. Oh, by the way, you've got this main socket on both of them, and I've mentioned that before, very useful in this part of the world where there aren't that many sockets, and it also keeps your power cables nice and tidy, because you can daisy chain components to reduce clutter, and if you don't have a lot of sockets, which as I said I don't have many sockets in my house, so it's quite useful. Just point to note the power cables are wired in on these components. So there we are. That's the rear ends of these two machines. Okay, so I flipped them over and I got their bottoms facing up in the air, and yeah, they look identical to me. Notice that the feet, and this is quite common, I think all my Intec 205 series components have this. They've got plastic feet with this cork inner part, and they've all got that. Now, if you are buying, at any point, if you are buying a component from this range, in fact, I suppose if you're buying anything, something that a lot of sellers don't do online is they very rarely show you the underside. So I would ask to see it. The reason being is because I've bought stuff where sometimes the feet are damaged or missing, and the other thing is some of these feet that have got these cork inserts, sometimes the cork is rotten or just perished, or just in very bad condition or whatever. So just, if I were you, there are other issues that you may encounter, because I think I've noticed a lot of sellers online never show you the underside of hi-fi equipment. So I would ask to see that if I were you. And if you're selling stuff, please show it so we know you've got nothing to hide. Right, I've plugged them in and I'm ready to switch them on. So let's see what happens when I switch this one on first. Okay, very fast. Let's see what this one does. Interesting that the newer generation had a very slight reading mode, and the older generation did not display reading. It just simply came up with no disc immediately. So the newer generation with the blue display, there's definitely unused dark space either side of the display, which gives the impression of a bigger screen, but it seems to be redundant dark matter. Right, so this one with the yellow LEDs, I doubt that there's any kind of screen on that. I suspect, because it's got the red as well, I suspect that these are red and yellow LEDs. I suspect, as I said, that they are white LEDs behind what looked like a blue screen. So there we are, they're both on. What do you think? What do you think of the colour? I have to say, I sort of prefer, I like the colour of the yellow and red display. I do go for that. Please bear in mind there are other MD decks throughout the Intec 205 range that came and went. And I think this is the last of the Intec 205 series MD decks. I'm fairly sure this is the last one that they made. So there we are. This has been Hi-Fi Lo-Fi. Thanks for watching.